Resident Evil Requiem came with many shocking revelations into the history of the series, but it also came with a lot of unanswered questions, mysteries that remain unsolved even after finishing the game. Throughout the game, there are several hints towards important events happening just outside what we are shown as Leon and Grace. There is a deeper story to unravel here. Let's take a look at what we know and see if we can figure out what's going on. Upon entering this room, Grace finds a man bleeding out on the floor who desperately warns her to stay away from Emily.
Stay away from her!
Are you alright?
Get away!
No, hold on!
He succumbs to his wounds shortly after. This death is one of the most perplexing in the entire game. The keycard that we find on his body tells us that his name is Jeff Gray, and he seems to bear a striking resemblance to this doctor that we see during Chloe's section of the game. Presumably Jeff was a doctor working at the facility, although we have no way to be sure of that. Examining the body itself tells us that his neck was gouged by something sharp. There are zombies wielding sharp weapons wandering around in the hospital, such as the chef, but these zombies instantly begin eating their victims as soon as they overwhelm them. And the body does not have any bites, nor does his corpse show any signs of having been infected. A popular theory is that the girl, the monster who stalks you for half of the game, was the cause of his injury. There is a giant hole in the ceiling which indicates that she must have come through here at some point. When Grace enters this room, Marie's cell is locked and empty. However, there is a small hole in the wall. Marie must have escaped her cell through this hole, and based on the size of the hole, she was not fully transformed at the time. Marie, therefore, must have come back here at some later point after her transformation was complete, entering through the giant hole that she created in the ceiling. Marie could have injured Gray with her claws before escaping through the ceiling. However, this theory has some serious problems. For one, the girl has a tendency to eat her victims by biting their heads off. Why would she have attacked Gray and then just left him there? The timeline of events also doesn't really line up. Whatever happened in this room is implied to have taken place just before Grace arrived. Marie had been stalking Grace since before she woke up in the clinic, until Leon took her out. If Marie was the one who attacked Gray, he would have had to have been bleeding out on the floor since before Grace woke up. And then there's the wound itself. It seems far too clean and deliberate to be the result of a scrambling, desperate attack from Lucy's claws. I can't help but feel that if Lucy were to use her claws, the results would be a lot messier. Jeff Gray appears to have been deliberately murdered by a non-infected human wielding a knife or sharp instrument. This would implicate the game's main villain, Victor Gideon. In my opinion, Gideon is the prime suspect. We see him wielding a scalpel during his interrogation of Leon, and he even uses it to cut his neck open. However, there are some holes in this theory as well. For one, there is no apparent motive for Gideon to kill Gray. Victor Gideon may be a remorseless murderer, but his murders are not without purpose. Gideon caused the T-virus outbreaks in downtown Renwood and in the hospital as a distraction for Leon. If Gideon killed Gray, it seems strange that he wouldn't infect him with the T-virus while he was at it. After all, if Leon had made it down to this room, it would have been one more zombie for him to deal with. Without any more information, it's impossible to definitively conclude exactly what happened to Jeff Gray. However, all of the clues seem to indicate that someone in the hospital deliberately murdered him. We may get some answers in the future, but until then, this remains one of the strangest mysteries in the entire game. Zeno basically comes out of nowhere, but there is something undeniably familiar about this speedy, blonde, sunglass-wearing, power-hungry villain. Let's be honest with ourselves. Zeno is definitely a clone of Albert Wesker.
Sure and complete global saturation.
He looks exactly like Wesker, he has the same powers, the same voice actor. But if all that weren't enough, the fact that Gideon calls him an imitation really seals the deal.
You are nothing but an imitation.
We already know from Resident Evil 5 that Wesker was created by Spencer as part of his eugenics program.
Are you saying I was manufactured?
This seems to be almost certainly setting up some kind of big return for Albert Wesker. His appearance in Resident Evil 4 Remake seems far too deliberate for Capcom not to be planning something big with him. Wesker is the most iconic villain in the entire series, maybe even one of the most iconic video game antagonists of all time. It makes sense that Capcom would want to bring him back. Canonically establishing the existence of not just cloning, but Wesker clones opens up a whole world of story possibilities. Another Wesker clone could be the antagonist of a future game, or it could even be revealed that the Wesker who died in Resident Evil 5 wasn't even the true Albert Wesker. There are also files in the hospital that indicate that Gideon has been researching using the T-virus to transfer the memories of Umbrella founder Oswald E. Spencer into a new host. This could be laying the groundwork for a fully resurrected Albert Wesker. This also fits with the persistent rumors that Capcom are currently working on remakes for Resident Evil 5 and Code Veronica, and possibly even Resident Evil 1. Remaking these specific games in the RE engine would be consistent with Capcom's strategy in the last few years. They've made 2 big remakes following Leon and introduced him to a new generation of players, and then followed that up with a brand new installment featuring Leon. My guess is that they're planning to do something similar to set up Wesker as an antagonist for a new generation, remaking 2 or possibly 3 of the games that he features most heavily in, and properly establishing his antagonistic relationship with Chris Redfield. That would also set up a potential Resident Evil 10 focusing on one more epic confrontation between Chris Redfield and Albert Wesker. Speaking of Chris...
Where is Chris anyway?
No idea.
For a game that features the BSAA so prominently, Chris Redfield is conspicuously absent from Resident Evil Requiem. The last time we saw Chris, he had just discovered that the BSAA were using bioweapons. He then decided to go rogue with his team of wolves. We see the wolves again at the end of Requiem, apparently having been sent to Ark by Chris to assist Leon.
Mr. Kennedy, I have a message from Captain Redfield.
But where is Chris Redfield? There's no way to know for certain, but it seems that Chris is busy fighting his own war against the BSAA and Blue Umbrella. Since there are now 2 distinct factions of the BSAA, it's difficult to tell whether or not the soldiers we saw getting slaughtered by Zeno were working with Chris. The fact that Zeno killed them all seems to imply that they are not working for the mainline faction of the BSAA, which seems to be affiliated with the Connections. However, it's also possible that the mainline faction of the BSAA have their own agenda and sent these soldiers in to find Elpis before Zeno so that they could use it for their own purposes. The only other hint we get towards Chris's whereabouts during the events of Requiem is this end credit scene, where members of the mainline faction retrieve something from Ark.
Remaining BSAA forces have been neutralized. Retrieving the objective before they send in the wolves.
It's unclear exactly when this scene is supposed to have taken place, or even what it was that was so important for them to retrieve before the wolves arrived. One thing, however, is certain. Chris is on a very important mission, and whatever his object is, he clearly thinks it's important. He's racing against time to find something in Ark before the mainline faction of the BSAA get their hands on it. Whatever this object is, it probably isn't Elpis since Leon has already accounted for it. And it probably isn't Grace's floppy disk since she left that in the computer terminal in the archive room. There must be something else hidden in Ark, and clearly, Chris thinks that whatever this is must be more important than securing Elpis, something which the soldiers, unfortunately, seem to have retrieved before he could get to it. Regardless, Chris's absence feels far too intense intentional to be accidental, so I have a feeling that we will be seeing him very soon.
Someone's gotta pay.
Hey, are you enjoying this video? Then please consider leaving a like. It really helps out a lot and it makes it possible for me to make more videos just like this one. Also, be sure to check out my other Resident Evil content. I've linked a playlist down in the description. I also make videos about other cool stuff like Star Wars and whatever else I feel like talking about at the time. Recently I made a video about my complicated feelings about AI art. If you're just as frustrated and annoyed about AI as I am, maybe you might find my video interesting. Or maybe you might find it cathartic to hear someone else going on a long rant about it. If you like my stuff, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any new videos. And now, the final mystery.
I've said my piece. I only hope it serves as a requiem for those who have passed.
Umbrella founder Oswald E. Spencer is arguably the overarching villain of Resident Evil. He's also one of the most mysterious characters in the entire series. Despite the far-reaching consequences of his legacy, we really don't know all that much about him as a person. Prior to RE9, Spencer has only made one appearance in any of the Resident Evil games. In this scene from Resident Evil 5, Spencer shows no sign of guilt, remorse, or regret for his crimes.
Ironic, isn't it? For one who has the right to be a god. To face his own mortality.
Spencer is then killed by Albert Wesker. This scene depicts Spencer as a thoroughly evil and unrepentant villain, right until the very end.
Arrogant even until the end.
Requiem seems to retcon this characterization. The game reveals that elpis is not the bioweapon that Zeno and Victor Gideon believe it to be. Elpis is an antiviral, apparently created by a guilt-ridden, remorseful Spencer.
Elpis is Spencer's atonement. It's an antiviral.
Many fans have doubted the sincerity of Spencer's atonement, believing instead that he created elpis for the reasons that Victor Gideon believes he did.
With elpis, all virus-based weapons are useless. The world order will be thrown into chaos.
We wanted a weapon.
Instead, Spencer gave us anarchy.
Now, there's no way to be certain of Spencer's true intentions for elpis, but I think it's safe to say that Victor Gideon is completely wrong about Spencer. If Spencer created elpis to cause worldwide anarchy and watch the world burn, why didn't he simply release elpis before he died? Why the elaborate password and the failsafe? And why entrust this password to Alyssa Ashcroft, a journalist to whom he confessed everything to in a tell-all interview? The only possible explanation is that Spencer was intentionally trying to prevent elpis from falling into the wrong hands, which he felt included people like The Connections, Zeno, and Victor Gideon. This also wouldn't be the first time that Gideon was completely wrong about the intentions of his master. He seems to have just assumed that elpis was a bioweapon, specifically a mind control agent, based purely on wild speculation.
Your research was wrong. Elpis wasn't a weapon. There was never a key.
Spencer's paper was obviously incomplete. There was no connection between Grace and Emily.
The story only really makes sense if Spencer is telling the truth about his intentions for elpis.
I was wrong, and I am plagued by guilt. Happiness cannot be achieved at the expense of others.
The same is also true of Spencer's insistence that Grace isn't a clone. Although some fans have suggested that Spencer is lying and that Grace must be one of his clones, as Zeno claims, I heavily doubt this. While I understand the instinct to be skeptical of anything and everything that comes out of the mouth of Oswald E. Spencer, we should acknowledge that Spencer has basically no reason to lie to Alyssa Ashcroft at this point. He's already told her everything about elpis and the clones in this interview. Alyssa even asks Spencer if Grace is one of his experiments, and he says no.
Who is that? Is that one of your subjects?
Of course not. She was alone in the world. I took her in to make amends. Is she perfectly normal? Just an average child needing a home.
If Spencer had already told Alyssa everything, including the password to Elpis, why lie at the very end? If that still isn't enough to convince you, there's also the fact that Grace has a different hair and eye color to the clones.
There was no connection between Grace and Emily.
Grace not being a clone certainly makes this scene, where Zeno angrily insists that she is, seem a lot more like projection on his part. Thematically, however, there is a kind of poetic irony in all of this. Gideon and Zeno assume that Elpis must be a bioweapon because they can't imagine that Spencer would create anything else. They believe that Grace is a clone because they can't imagine why Spencer would show any interest in an ordinary child. They assume that the password to Elpis must be in Grace's genetics.
There's nothing special about me. I was never any key. Spencer wanted to make amends.
When the whole time it was hidden on a floppy disk which Victor didn't even bother to take from Grace when he first kidnapped her. He was more interested in taking her blood when the key to Elpis was in her pocket the whole time. And even at the very end, Victor Gideon is still misinterpreting his master's intentions.
Don't you see the genius?
Revealing that Grace was a clone the whole time would kind of take away from the deliciousness of this irony. Victor Gideon is a fool who never truly understood the man that he dedicated his life to. I love it. All that being said, there are still many unanswered questions about Spencer's role in all of this. For one, why did Spencer choose to hide the password to Elpis in an interview?
Why did you accept my request for an interview?
Why did he decide to give Grace to Alyssa? And why did Alyssa never publish the interview in nearly 2 decades? At some point, Alyssa must have found out that Spencer had given the password to Elpis in her interview. She also must have found out that Spencer wanted her to give the password to Grace when she was old enough. Presumably Spencer must have contacted her at some point after the interview but before his death. Otherwise, it really doesn't make any sense why Alyssa wouldn't contact someone like Chris Redfield and give them the password to Elpis. Elpis would be a formidable asset to him in his war against bioterrorism. The only reason why Alyssa would keep this secret for Grace would be if she felt that it was her birthright as Spencer's heir. Spencer must have wanted Grace to be the only one who decided exactly what to do with Elpis. At this point though, we are just blindly theorizing. But one thing is for certain. If Capcom are planning a remake of Resident Evil 5, we're probably going to get a different version of this scene.
The right to be a god.
Recently, Capcom announced a story expansion DLC for Resident Evil Requiem. So we may get the answers to some or even all of the mysteries that we've discussed in this video very soon, or even in future titles. For now though, these mysteries remain unsolved. But what do you think? Comment below with your own theories, and be sure to check out my other Resident Evil videos linked below. Thanks for watching.